Welcome to For the Record. I'm Ellie La Liberté. Well, this week we're getting a better insight into where voters stand just 6 weeks out from the spring election. The headline, they're still undecided. I sat down with Marquette Law School Poll Director Charles Franklin to break it all down.
It really is a remarkably undecided electorate right now. 2/3 say they haven't made a decision about the Supreme Court race, but 2/3 are undecided about the gubernatorial primaries as well. And if you go back and look at earlier years, that was not nearly so high an undecided rate in February of those election years. Another way to look at it is on the Supreme Court. We ask how much have you read or heard about the election. Only 6% say they've heard a lot this year. 1 year ago in February, it was 39% that had heard a lot about the Supreme Court election.
And I want to talk about some of the numbers too, because Lazar is trailing Taylor in the polling that you found. What does that show us about how this race is shaping up so far?
Well, if 2/3 are undecided, Taylor has a 5-point lead with registered voters, but it's both of them are getting a really small share of the vote. So I don't think you want to project that this is where the race will turn out. On the other hand, Taylor has a better favorability rating, though, again, an awful lot of people don't know enough about her to have an opinion, whereas Lazar's favorability is a little bit net unfavorable. Taylor's is a little bit net favorable. These are not huge differences, but they are persistent differences in the survey.
And I want to mention now, you mentioned the gubernatorial primary, and I wanted to talk to you because, like you said, most voters still don't know who they're going to support for governor, but Hong leads the group among people who do know who they are voting for. Was that an unexpected result?
Well, she also led the poll in October when even more people hadn't made up their minds. But you got to put it in perspective. In this poll, she gets 11% of the vote, and Mandela Barnes gets 10%, and Sarah Rodriguez gets 6%. Everybody else is at 3% or below. So none of these have a meaningful lead when you think the margin of error for the primary question is about 6.4 percentage points. I think the bigger story there is Mandela Barnes is much better known than the other Democratic candidates. And when he first got in the race, there was a lot of talk about how that greater name advantage would give him a big advantage in the primary. But we're seeing really not that advantage working out with Hong at 11 and Barnes at 10. So again, an awful long ways to go on this, but at least that name ID is not translating directly into votes for Barnes at this point.
Do you think this poll tells us a lot about the Democratic primary, or is the headline just overall people don't know enough yet?
The headline is people don't know enough. The subtext, though, is with everybody at such a low percentage of support, it does mean that the field is open. If one of them can break out, can do something or take a position that captures the public's attention, there's certainly the opportunity for any of that group of 8 candidates to catch fire and get attention. And we'll see if they can do that and when that happens.
What do you make of the fact that Tom Tiffany has less name recognition than Mandela Barnes, despite the fact that Barnes ran unsuccessfully for a Senate seat in 2022?
Yeah, I think part of that is structural. U.S. members of Congress are relatively well known in their district. Tiffany's well known in the part of the state that's his 7th congressional district. But when we ask about them statewide, they're really not known outside the district.
One of the things I found the most interesting from this poll was data centers. So I want to turn now to that data. What did your poll find about data centers?
It's become quite unpopular in the state. Our question is, do you think the benefits outweigh the costs, or do you think the costs outweigh the benefits? In our October poll, the first time we'd asked about data centers, 55% said the costs outweighed the benefits. This poll, it's 70% that say the costs outweigh the benefits. So that is a remarkable change over just a few months from October till now. The other thing is, in October, there were almost no partisan differences in how people felt about data centers. It was about 55% opposed, whether you were a Republican, independent, or a Democrat. But in this poll, Republicans haven't changed. They're still at about 55. But independents are up to over 70% opposed, and Democrats are pushing 90% opposed. It's a big partisan gap, even though most Republicans, too, are opposed to it. I think the message to the proponents of data centers is they have an awful lot of messaging yet to do to convince voters that these are a good idea.
Did that partisan shift surprise you? Were you expecting that?
I was surprised in October that there was so little difference, because these days most things have a real partisan gap. But I said this is a new issue, and I think over time parties will begin to divide on the issue.
You also asked about the governor's 400-year veto, and for a little context here, that was that 2023 partial veto that allowed school districts to increase their levy limit every year for 400 years. Where do voters stand on that? Was there anything unexpected you found among GOP, independent voters?
It's almost perfectly divided, 49 to 50 on that question. But the partisan split, as you would expect, is there. It's in the 80% range of Republicans that oppose that veto, in the 80% range for Democrats who support it. But those all-important independent swing voters are also divided 50-50 on that question.
I wanted to ask, too, if this kind of adds some insight. We're going to see a constitutional amendment go to the voters in November asking if they want to. It wouldn't impact this 400-year veto, but bar the governor from creating any tax or fee with that partial veto power. Can this provide any insight to how voters will behave towards that question?
Yeah, I think it's a little early to tell. We did ask, or have asked, about whether you think the use of that veto is appropriate. Not specifically this 400-year, but just in general. For decades, governors have had this ability to do the line item, word-by-word vetoes. People are pretty skeptical of that. From the political point of view, it's probably a good issue for Republicans to put on the ballot. But when you get to whether Evers' particular use of it was appropriate or not, there we're pretty much evenly divided.
That's all I have for you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.